Hello and welcome to another episode of the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. This idea of social responsibility. I mean, right now. There's all kinds of stuff in the news about DEI and uh, the upside, the downside, the ins and the outs, and the politicization of all of this stuff. At the end of the day, what's true is a couple of things here, and I'm using this as an introduction to my guest. But what's true about business is that the purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet. And if you're doing that well, whether it's a service or product that you're offering, people will ultimately beat a path to your door because they want to experience that uplift. They want to experience having their life having their life work better. So, that's one piece that is always informing the work that I do with my clients. The other piece of it just has to do with the notion that everything is connected. I mean, if we literally take quantum physics at its word, if we take the Upanishads, if we take ancient texts of wisdom, the perennial philosophy, all of them point to the same thing. Everything is connected. There is nothing in this universe that does not touch and impact other parts of the universe. And I mean universe in the universal sense, but it's also true in the micro sense. Yeah, my individual actions make a difference. Everything that I'm doing makes a difference. As a business, the decisions I make and the activities we take as a consequence of those decisions have ripple effects way beyond the immediate folks that are touched by it. There's a ripple that occurs. And it's that ripple that I'm interested in. I'm a member, well, not a member. I am on the board. I'm a member of the board of directors of an organization called the World Business Academy. And the Academy's been around for about 30 plus years. The mission of the Academy is very simple. It is to begin the process of people understanding that business has a moral obligation because business is the most pervasive force on this planet. There's nothing in the world, literally in this world, that is not touched by the activities of business. And as a consequence of that, business has the responsibility to take responsibility for the whole. Not just take responsibility for the part, take responsibility for the whole. And if we've got business leaders that are stepping up to that responsibility, what we have is an enlightened process whereby the realization of the purpose of business begins to be actualized. That is to uplift the experience, the quality of living for everything on this planet. So with that preamble, I want to introduce my guest today. Jim Feiner is a realtor on a very interesting area of the planet that most people have heard about, particularly here in the U.S. Martha's Vineyard, small little island, but the work that Jim is doing with his organization, and he's lived there since he was 9 years of age. The work that he's doing with his company is actually, in terms of my experience of it, has implications on a global standpoint. He's embraced the whole idea of social responsibility in a very interesting way. And I wanted to have him on the show. He and I had a previous conversation. I wanted to have him on the show to emphasize and illustrate that you don't have to be a giant conglomerate. You don't have to be the largest company in the world to make a social difference. You can be whatever you are, wherever you are, and have a dramatic impact on the quality of life of people that you interact with on a daily basis through the work that you do as your business. In my business at Avatar Resources, we have a social responsibility partner. I mean a social responsibility partner, the Unstoppable Foundation. It's an organization that we have supported for years, and they do work throughout the world, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. There's over 500,000 people daily that are being touched by the work that the foundation is doing. Jim's doing something different with his real estate company. And it's just fascinating how he's been working with this. So when I spoke with him, I just said, Jim, I got to get you on the program. Not so much because I wanted to have a more in-depth conversation, but I wanted to spread the word a little bit broader. I wanted to have him have a forum here where he could actually have much greater exposure about what he's doing. with the intent of inspiring you, the listener, to begin to think about what can you do to make a difference? What can you do that you're not already doing that will have an impact out there in a different sort of a way? The purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet. So with that lengthy introduction and preamble, Jim, welcome to the show.
Blaine, thank you very much. That is quite an introduction. I totally agree with you that businesses should have a moral responsibility, and I think most of the time they forget that. Personally, living in a little community like Martha's Vineyard, where we're surrounded by water, where everything we do is interconnected and impacts everybody else, it's really easy to see how it all kind of connects, and also how you can maybe make a little bit of a ripple effect by changing your patterns of behavior. My history, yes, I've been here since I was 9. My family were innkeepers, and I've always, wanted to be part of the community and to give back. I kind of thought, maybe I'd be involved in government. I've been on conservation. I'm the chairman of the housing committee. I've done affordable housing for 23 years. I've developed affordable housing. But as a real estate broker, I felt like I was part of the problem. I'm selling all these beautiful second homes, which is driving up the price of real estate. And so, I started off trying to develop affordable housing. And one day I said, I'm an out of the box thinker, because I feel like there's always great ideas that are out of the norm of the tradition. And if you can just step away from the norm, anything's possible. So I decided to merge my business with philanthropy. It was an experiment. It's a social experiment. And I sold a house to a wonderful attorney and his wife. And I said, guess what? You guys get to donate 10% of my commission. And they said, really? And I said, yes. What do you want to do? And they said, affordable housing, which was perfect for me because I love affordable housing. And so we gave $4,500 to the Island Housing Trust, which is the island developer of affordable housing on the Vineyard. That was 2016. Since that point, we've given 157 checks, totaling a little over $400,000 to 37 different nonprofits on the Vineyard and 3 or 4 off island. I don't really want my money to go off island, but I will give up the fight if my client feels strongly. And I had someone who's really wanted to support, a group in New York City that helps people who are illegally incarcerated. And then there was another one for minorities in Boston. And, it's been really fun. We actually turned this into a fun process, because whenever we sell a house for either a buyer or a seller, when we do the award, we have a 3-foot check. We take a big photo. And if it's a buyer, they get to actually become affiliated with the nonprofit they choose. So now the nonprofit also gets a potential new donor. And that has been kind of my goal, is to try to figure out how to bolster the nonprofit community through real estate transactions. And it's worked pretty well. It hasn't worked exactly like I thought it would. For starters, when you live on an island like this, there's a lot of real estate brokers. They're on all sorts of nonprofit boards. And so the nonprofits feel conflicted about whether or not they should support you or support me in this case. And, at first I thought, well, I'm going to have this great solution and everyone's going to be excited to refer people to me. But it was really sort of a naive idea that they would do that. And I realized pretty quickly that it didn't matter. My goal was to give money away. I would do it slowly at first, and eventually I'll build momentum. People will know what I'm doing. If they think it's a great program, they'll call me up and they'll work with me.
Yeah. So, that's an interesting point. That notion of, what's in it for me, rather than an altruistic, I'm just going to give back because giving back is part and parcel of what it means to be alive on this planet. I mean, when you look at nature, there's nothing in nature that serves solely as a center of accumulation. Everything's a center of distribution in some way, shape, or form. and nature works pretty good. Yeah, I mean, as a matter of fact, as far as I can tell, nature's really the only truly free market system that is operating. Yeah, truly. I mean, there's no
Mm-hmm.
artificial constraints. When there is, some damming that occurs, with the Beaver Dam as an example, or something like that, there's a point in time where it breaks, and sometimes it breaks catastrophically because accumulation is not what nature works from. Distribution is what nature works from. So, to those of you that are listening here, Bob Proctor was a very good friend of mine. Loved that man dearly, and Bob died a couple of years ago. But one of the things that, and he was a very big supporter of the Unstoppable Foundation. Was a mentor of mine for many years. But I asked him one time, "What happened? Are you ever concerned about what happens to the money that you give?" And he gave millions of dollars, away, millions of dollars away. He says, "I don't care if they bury it in their backyard. What they do with it is up to them. The idea of me just distributing makes a big difference in the world. It's a consciousness of distribution. And out of that consciousness of distribution, there's a rooting of that is in abundance. And it's a consciousness of abundance. And it's impossible to outgive the universe. It truly is. It's impossible to outgive the universe. There's more than enough, more than enough. So I was interested in just hearing you say that, whether they referred business to me or not became less and less an issue. Yeah. And that, kind of is a hallmark, I think, of a true philanthropic mindset that is generative in the long term. So I just wanted to interject that and reinforce what I heard you say around it, because I think it is a very important point for people to hear. If you're giving with the intent of receiving, it starts tainted a little bit here. But if you're giving with the intent of making a difference and having impact, completely different ballgame. Completely different ballgame.
I totally agree. It's interesting because when you start to give, it feels really good. Before I did any of this, my wife and I would sit down every year. We'd write 30 checks to our favorite charities and give away, a couple $1,000s a year. And to us, that was meaningful. That was a really nice gesture. And when I started to do this business model, suddenly I'm giving large checks, big checks to organizations, and it's really meaningful. And we've had a couple of checks in the $20,000 range from, either multiple sales or a very large sale. And I feel so good. I just feel so proud of myself to be able to do that. And it's like, it helps for me to reinforce that I have enough. Because when you have enough, whatever that means, when you can give freely, it means you have enough. And then you can feel more comfortable with it. I felt like, that's a great thing. So when I actually started to do this whole program, a friend of mine who's a nonprofit coach sent me a video, it was a TED talk of a guy. And the guy said, if you want to make a difference in this world, if you want to be really impactful, go and work in the stock market, make a lot of money and give it away. Well, I was 50 or 45 at the time. And I just like, not going to do that. But I thought, turning my business into a socially responsible business model was good. And it has created a certain amount of addictive quality because I love to give money away. I recognize I still have to provide for my family and make sure my son's college tuition's paid, et cetera. But it hasn't affected me in the slightest in terms of my comfort. Matter of fact, it's only been reinforcing that I probably have more than I need, which is probably true for a lot of people. And it's also made me ask the question, how much is enough? So, my island business Client's Choice has been a 10% referral model, 10% donation model based upon our local sales, but it's not scalable. And it's not something that could bring in the kind of money that I would hope to give away. Because I originally set a goal of giving away $100,000. Well, I hit that goal. Now I'm up to 400. So I pushed the margin up to $1 million. I want to give away $1 million. How do I do that? I've actually got to make the money to give it away. And so I created this new company called Refer2Give. And I would love to say it's an original idea. It's not. It was my original idea, but then I realized there was another company that had already thought of the idea out in Chicago called Investing in Communities. And they've been doing it for 20 years. They do it mostly through leasing. They do a lot of commercial leases, and they give 75% of their commission to charity and keep 25%. So when I set up Refer2Give, I thought if we kept 50% and donated 50%, that would be a reasonable thing, because ultimately I'm going to hire people. I'm going to pay people a fair wage to do the work. And if we had extra money left over after that, we would make donations to our own charities of our choosing, which is probably where I would go. But the point of making the money is to be able to create an income stream to give away.
Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm, and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.
And so I kind of developed this business concept. My wife was a guide with a mountain group up in New Hampshire called Redline Guides. And she was taking a couple on a hike one day. And they were saying, oh, yeah, we're thinking about moving to New Hampshire. And she said, well, geez, my husband's just started this business idea. And she shared this with them. And they were like, wow. And so they called me up. And I found them a broker. And what I do is I actually go out and interview brokers to find someone who's really good. After 33 years in business, I know what a good broker looks like.
Yeah.
I checked their resources. This guy was awesome. And they worked with him for 6 months. They bought a house for $500,000. And there was probably like a $3,200 referral fee, or it's like a $3,000 referral fee. And we donated it to the White Mountain Outdoor Center, which is an organization that supports search and rescue on the White Mountains. Now, in New England, we have the White Mountains, which is a beautiful, very exposed, rocky area with Mount Washington. And
Right,
every
Mount
year,
Washington,
every year people die in Mount Washington. I'm going up there this weekend to go ski it, actually. Hopefully they don't have to rescue me. Avalanches, bad decisions. There's lots of reasons. And so I was thrilled to give them this check. The people, the Paradises, were really nice to work with me, and they were thrilled to be able to support this organization, who then thanked them. And maybe they ended up becoming, consistent donors to that organization. I don't know, because once I give the money away, I kind of end that part of my knowledge of the relationship with that organization. But I've also closed houses in LA, in Western Mass. I have a property under contract in Everett, and
Everett, Washington?
No, Everett, Massachusetts.
Okay, I was going to say you're white, ranging wide here, because it's the opposite coast.
You never know.
Well, I'm going to talk to you about that, just in terms of the contacts that you have and the interactions you have. You mentioned brokers here. You're not working with the large companies like Remax or Zillow or any of that sort of a thing at this point in time, I'm assuming.
So let's just be clear. Zillow is a disruptor.
Yes, it is.
So they started off being a resource for people, and then they started to be able to control where buyers are going to their brokers and selling time. And then they started to get buyers themselves and send them to brokers in exchange for 30% referral fee. So they are the number one, they're the Amazon of real estate disruptions in the industry. But I would work with any broker from any industry, from any real estate company.
Yeah.
And 100% of the time, they're going to say yes when I call them up and I said, hi, Mary, I've got a wonderful guy named Blaine. He wants to buy a house in your neighborhood. Would you like to work with him and pay me a 25% referral fee? Of course, because she didn't have to work to create the connection. So it's really a win-win-win-win situation
Mm-hmm.
because the broker gets an unsolicited client. The client gets a really good broker. The client gets to give away my commission and we get a tax write-off.
There you go. Now, just a curiosity question, just given the change in the fiduciary guidelines, with real estate, the buyer seller, that whole agreement piece, how has that impacted what you're doing? Because all of a sudden that has become almost a moot issue.
Well, it's funny. The NAR is supposed to be the organization that raises our ethical standards as a profession. Right. And here they are actually lowering them and sullying the brokers of America. So for the record, I'm not a member of the NAR. Martha's Vineyard actually has a dual MLS situation. Mm-hmm. And the number one, multiple listing service. And the number one multiple listing service here is called Link. And Link is not affiliated with the NAR or the MAR. So we are fortunately not tied into that whole lawsuit and having to be concerned about that. And I think overall, the people who we work with have very high ethical standards.
Yeah.
We definitely learn some things about it. We include all the stuff that says real estate commissions are negotiable. That's the most important thing. Yep. And everyone should know that. And, but from a historical perspective, I've always said that to my clients. And when we have deals where there's challenges involved, I'm the first one to say, listen, you throw in a little money, you throw a little money, I'll throw some money in, we make the deal happen. Because it's always about, coming out with a win for everybody. That's the best way to come to a successful outcome. Brokers people who I've talked to often ask me, am I going to go out and try to get agencies involved? And the answer is no. Ultimately, if this company grows in success, I'll develop real estate connections with people who are across the country, and I'll develop a network. I mean, that could actually happen, and they'd be from all the different agencies. And the most important thing is that the buyer or the seller gets to choose if they like the broker that I've picked. If they don't like my choice, we can use a different broker. We can use their cousin. We can use a friend of a friend. We can use anybody as long as we create the referral fee between them and the broker.
And it's the referral fee that actually gets distributed to
exactly
the charities.
Correct.
Or the causes. Yeah.
The causes.
So, part of my intent on having you on the show was to be able to facilitate the creation of that network. Yeah. Because obviously exposure and visibility is key to that whole process. If somebody was an agent or had a small shop, as an example, like my daughter-in-law, she's a broker. She's got, I think, 4 or 5 realtors working with her as agents. How would she get in touch with you?
Well, for starters, even though that my business is patented, the concept is free. Anyone could recreate what I do. But if she wanted to reach out to me and talk to me, I would be happy to coach anyone. They could easily communicate with me through email, Jim Feiner, FEINER @gmail.com. If they Google me, I'm pretty heavily on the web because of all of the donations, and I've got a lot of press coverage and Feiner Real Estate. We have a MVRE.com website, which is Martha's Vineyard Real Estate, back in the days when acronyms were good. And I'd be thrilled to work with people or coach them. One of the funny things about the Vineyard is when I started to do client's choice, I never really thought that I would have pushback from my fellow broker community, but I kind of suspected that they might not appreciate it because I'm doing something that they wouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. And people did come to me and say, they're not happy with you. And I get it because, everybody has a different attachment to money, right? How much money is enough is a very difficult question. And there's a new organization on the island trying to have these very difficult conversations called Still Point. That's going to be very interesting. And I put that up on the board. How much is enough? When do you know if you have enough? And is it about retirement? Is it about your bank account? Is it, so it's a personal thing. And I think most people in our society never have enough. And I've certainly bumped into a lot of people who
Or
are
at least
worth
I think they don't.
billions of dollars and they still want to have more.
Yeah, they don't think
So
enough. Yeah,
they don't have enough.
yeah.
So I feel like, pushing this agenda for me has emphasized to me that I have enough. And it's also raised the bar professionally on the Vineyard so that other real estate agencies are more compelled to be generous and compassionate in what they do and giving back to the island community. And I think that's been an unintended consequence of my actions.
Well, I think one of the other unintended consequences that you're beginning to shepherd here is helping people redefine what it means to be a success or to be successful. Because oftentimes there's a dollar sign assigned to that label, success. And if I make $1 million or if I give $1 million away, I'm successful. Money's just money's just a symbol for an experience. And most people don't define success through the lens of experience. They define it through the lens of an outcome. Yeah, an endpoint. And that's where we get, I think, ourselves wrapped around the axle when we start thinking in terms of, is this enough? Is this more? Yeah, the whole context. I don't have enough. I have just enough, or I have more than enough. There's 3 different contextual frames that people live out of, and just enough. It's still got some squeak to it. There's a little pinch point there, but more than enough. That's an individual decision and assessment, but it can't be predicated solely on a dollar sign. It's got to be predicated on experience. And what I'm hearing from you, and this is one of the things that I actually was resonating with when we first spoke, was that your definition of more than enough had to do with, the experience of living, not so much the experience of having a certain amount in the bank. The experience of living. It feels this way when I'm able to write a $20,000 check. It feels this way. And it's that energetic of emotional energetic that has a frequency to it that attracts a certain type of experience. And it's generative. Energy. When we think about the law of attraction, so to speak, it's predicated on the law of vibration. Everything vibrates. Everything has a frequency associated with it, and anything that vibrates in association with a certain, it's called resonance. When it's vibrating in the same way, I've got stuff around me that's vibrating in the same way. And that's kind of how life seems to work. We attract attracts like, that vibrational frequency. So if we're beginning to define success in a different quantitative and qualitative term, that has to do with experience, emotional experience, all of a sudden the game takes on a different flavor.
That's really interesting to put it into that context. I've actually done some meditation with a guy named Joe Dispenza.
Oh, Joe's a very good friend of mine.
And I love what he does. I think it's very powerful, and it's really easy to forget the power of the energy and the fact that we're all just energy beings. I mean, all we are is atoms, molecules, and energy, and it all definitely, it resonates well with me, what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah. Good. Well, Jim, I've loved this conversation. I could continue it for some time here, but we've got a 30-minute kind of clock on this thing. Where can people find out more about what you're up to if they wanted to support what you're doing or get more information? You've given Jim Feiner at gmail.com, but is there a website that people can look at?
So our website is refer2give.com or refer2give at gmail.com. They can go on to our website and see what the organization does. We have to get some testimonials up on the site, but we're starting off on the slower side. But I would love if people thought that they were going to buy or sell real estate and want to be impactful and think that this is a cool concept, it would be amazing to have people call me up and say, hey, I'm in Washington, we know this broker down the street's really good. Can you work with us? I can do, we can do anything. The cool thing is it's a numbers game. So if I get a referral for $1 million house sale, I'm going to have $6,250 of referral fee to give away. If I get $10 million, it's $62,000. It's a numbers game. And, I had a company on Martha's Vineyard that gave me a referral once. It was a $7 million referral. And I wrote a check to them for $42,000 for making phone call. So I'm trying to take this model and use it as a force for good. And
Great.
I appreciate your helping me get the word out. I hope that we can find some people who say this is really cool. And, as far as giving to charities, I don't know where your organizations are, but it sounds like you guys choose organizations where the impact that you make is really significant. And that's something that I would love to talk about, because giving, $1,000 to one group is very different than giving it to another group. Yeah. Like on Martha's Vineyard, we gave $2,700 to the food pantry. We bought 7,000 pounds of food. Yeah. That's locally. And if you go to somewhere like Africa and you give $2,700, that's got a whole different impact.
Yeah.
And I'd love that. And so part of my interest in giving away is also to understand how I can be most impactful.
Wonderful. We'll continue to talk.
Thank you.
Folks, my guest today has been Jim Feiner. Refer2Give.com is the website. Jim Feiner, Feiner, at gmail.com would be a place that you could ping him directly. And I'm assuming he would get back to you pretty quickly. Okay. So as always, as we come to a close here, I want you to consider in your life being a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. This is something I say all the time. Find a way in your life to give things away. Find a way in your life. It's an abundant universe. You're an abundant person. You wouldn't be listening to this thing unless you had abundance in your life. So don't be stingy. Yeah, be a center of distribution. That's how nature works. And you want to be a part of nature. Well, you are a part of nature. So be a healthy part of nature. Yeah, contribute. And until next time, this is Blaine Bartlett. You've been listening to the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. And I hope you have a great rest of your week, whatever it may be. And I will see you on the next episode. Take care.